Does God allow vigilante justice? The type where people take justice into their own hands instead of letting the courts decide? Think back to the American Wild West. In those frontier towns where courts were weak or didn't even exist, suspected criminals were hanged without trial. Or even more recently, in the racism of the 19th and 20th centuries, mobs would execute African Americans, again, without trial. Now, even if these victims committed crimes deserving of capital punishment, does God allow this form of justice? Execution without trial? If you are here only for the answer is no. God does not allow vigilante justice. But in this video, we understand why God doesn't allow it, and we do so by looking into Noahide's law, which is God's law for non-Jews. Now, one important note before we begin. If you see somebody chasing another person with the intent to kill them, you are obligated to save that person who's being chased. And if that means that you have to kill them, then you are obligated to kill the pursuer. Obviously, if there's another means of stopping the pursuer, we prefer that. But we make this note because stopping a pursuer is not vigilante justice. Vigilante justice is where people punish alleged wrongdoers for crimes that they had already committed. A pursuer is in the act of committing a crime, and therefore we can stop the pursuer. In this video, though, we're only talking about people who have already committed a crime. Are we allowed to perform justice on this person without taking him into court? To make this more concrete, we know that murder carries a liability of capital punishment. If you live in a Noahide society and you see a murderer just walking down the street, are you allowed to kill him or hurt him? Similarly, if you see somebody who had just stolen, are you allowed to kill this person since theft also deserves death? Now, the answer to all these questions is no. Somebody who commits a crime must be taken to a court. And let's now get into why. We must go all the way back to Noah and the flood. God flooded the world in part because of the lawlessness of humanity, the violence, the corruption, the robbery. He then wipes everybody off the earth except for Noah and his family to start again and rebuild a new orderly society based on the commandments that he had already given to Adam, but which nobody had kept. That's why he flooded the world. God reiterates one of those commandments in Genesis 9 verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed. Now on the surface, it looks like God just allows men to kill murderers. He doesn't say that we need a court. But we must first think of the context. Remember, God had just destroyed humanity because of their violence, their lawlessness. Would God really destroy a world for violence and then immediately permit individuals to kill based off of their own judgment? It seems a little contradictory, and we know that God doesn't contradict himself. Let's dissect this verse further to prove our point. So first, on the face, this verse establishes the severity of murder and how it shall be punished. We also learn from this verse that God delegated the justice of the murderer to man. God himself will not kill the murderer for us. Now, how do we know this? That he has delegated it to man. Again, let's look at the context. If we look at Genesis 9 verse 5, God explains that he takes murder seriously and that he holds murderers accountable. Now, who is meant to carry out the justice for the murderer on earth? Genesis 9 verse 6, God says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed. Here, God delegates the execution of justice to human beings, to mankind. Verse 5 emphasizes that God holds murderers accountable, while verse 6 shows that God assigns responsibility to human societies to enforce justice. Now, we hold that no word of the Bible is unnecessary. God does not waste words. So if the Bible meant that individuals should act and not society, it could have said, whoever sheds the blood of man, his blood shall be shed. If this is what was written, then we would confront the murder scenario accordingly. We would see that the murderer killed somebody. Now we know that God holds murderers accountable, but then we'll see that God didn't just kill this murderer on the spot. So then we would conclude that that verse means that God wants us to kill the murderer, and he doesn't seem to care how we do it. The phrase, by man, though, is an addition in the verse. It suggests that there's something more. Now the word used here for man is Adam, which refers to humankind collectively. This word then suggests that justice is carried out by society, not by individuals. And since it is addressed right after the flood, We know that this killing must be ordered and organized, not impulsive and chaotic. And also notice what this verse could have said. It could have said, "You shall kill whoever murders." Or it could have said, "Any person who sees a murderer shall kill him." But no, it uses a passive collective language. By man shall the murderer's blood be shed. By an organized, established court. Now, how do we know that this interpretation is correct? Maybe we are reading into it. No, we know that this is correct for the following reason. The oral tradition says that one of the Noahide laws is to establish courts of justice. This is one of the 7 Noahide laws. Now, vigilante justice, where civilians can take justice into their own hands, is antithetical to establishing a court of justice. If individuals were allowed to execute criminals on their own, the command to establish courts would be meaningless. Courts exist precisely to prevent individuals from deciding guilt and punishment on their own. Courts make the judgment impartial. So again, since the oral tradition tells us that one of the commandments is to establish courts of justice, that's really all we need to know since the oral tradition is accurate. But a second reason is that we see further support for this idea later in the Torah. Numbers says, "The murderer shall not die before he stands in judgment before a court." Of course, one might object that this is referring only to the Jewish legal system, which is a fair point since many of the Torah laws were given just to the Jews. But why would God command only careful justice to the Jews, but then allow reckless killing for the rest of humankind, when he literally destroyed humankind for this recklessness? If anything, universal law should be more basic and stable. But we also know from other areas in the Torah that God is a just God. He abhors impartiality. So there's no way that he would condone private vengeance. So to review, the oral Torah tells us that non-Jews are required to establish courts of justice. The written Torah in Genesis 9 verse 6 tells us that murder must be punished by mankind. It does not give individuals permission to carry out that punishment. Instead, society must organize itself to carry out this punishment. And that justice, by necessity, must be carried out through courts. So this video was on vigilante justice. Is it allowed? No. I hope you enjoyed, learned something. Thank you, as always, for watching.